The email arrived at precisely 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, the subject line crisp and to the point. Invitation, Primetime Politics with James Kellerman, exclusive interview with U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi read the email with a raised eyebrow. She had no illusions about what this invitation meant. James Kellerman, the host of Primetime Politics, was infamous for his aggressive style, cutting down conservative guests with interruptions, condescending remarks, and audience-driven ambushes. His interviews weren't just discussions, they were battlegrounds. Yet, here he was, inviting her, Pam Bondi, the United States Attorney General under President Donald Trump, to his show. It was a high-profile slot, primetime, with millions watching. Accepting meant stepping into the lion's den. Declining meant appearing weak. Pam took a deep breath. "Let's do it," she told her communications director, Ryan Keller. Ryan hesitated. "Are you sure? You know how he operates. He'll try to corner you, twist your words, rile up the audience." Pam smirked. "Then let's make sure he doesn't." She spent the next few days preparing, working with her team to anticipate every possible attack. Policy critiques, political jabs, personal shots, nothing was off the table for Kellerman. But Pam wasn't just ready, she was prepared to turn the tables. By the time she arrived at the studio in downtown New York City, Pam Bondi had already visualized the entire interview in her mind. She walked in with confidence, a cool, collected demeanor. The green room buzzed with controlled chaos, producers scurried around, assistants prepped guests, and the show's staff whispered in hushed voices. Ryan handed her a cup of coffee and leaned in. "Remember, he'll try to get under your skin. Stay on message." Pam nodded. "Oh, I intend to." A tall, broad-shouldered man in a sleek charcoal suit strode into the room. James Kellerman. His signature smirk barely concealed his satisfaction. "Attorney General Bondi, a pleasure," he said, offering his hand. Pam shook it firmly. "Mr. Kellerman, thanks for having me." "Of course," Kellerman said smoothly. "I trust you're ready for a spirited discussion?" Pam tilted her head slightly. "Always." As she was led onto the set, the audience was already in place. The energy was thick with anticipation. The crowd, largely liberal-leaning as expected, murmured among themselves, waiting for the moment their host would expose another conservative guest. Pam settled into her seat across from Kellerman, adjusting her blazer as the countdown began. "Showtime," she whispered to herself. The studio lights flared. The cameras went live. "Welcome to Primetime Politics," Kellerman began, flashing his trademark smirk at the camera. "Tonight, we have a very special guest, United States Attorney General Pam Bondi, a key figure in the Trump administration." "Attorney General Bondi, thank you for joining us." Pam nodded politely. "Glad to be here, James." The audience was still waiting for the fireworks to begin. Kellerman didn't waste a second. His eyes gleamed as he leaned forward. "Let's get right to it," he said. "You've been called a defender of Trump's most controversial policies, immigration bans, law enforcement crackdowns, deregulations that many argue hurt the American people. Do you ever wonder if you're on the wrong side of history?" Pam smiled, a deliberate, knowing smile. And with that, the game had begun. Pam Bondi let the question linger for a beat, meeting Kellerman's stare with unwavering confidence. Then she leaned forward slightly. "You know, James," she said with a calm but firm tone, "I find it interesting that you phrase it that way, on the wrong side of history. Because history isn't written by television hosts looking for a gotcha moment. It's written by the American people, and the policies you're attacking? They're about keeping those people safe, keeping this country strong, and standing up for the rule of law." The audience rustled, some murmuring in approval, others shifting uncomfortably. Kellerman smirked, unfazed. "That's a convenient deflection, Attorney General, but let's talk specifics. Your administration's stance on immigration, separating families at the border, rolling back protections, many say it's heartless, even cruel." Pam didn't blink. "That's a complete misrepresentation of what's happening. We're enforcing laws that were already on the books, laws that, might I add, Democrats once supported. The difference is, this administration has the courage to actually enforce them instead of pretending illegal immigration isn't a crisis." Kellerman interrupted, his voice a little sharper. "So, you're saying separating families is acceptable?" Pam held up a hand. "I'm saying that if people enter the country illegally, they are subject to the law. Just like any other crime. The real issue is that previous administrations, both Republican and Democrat, ignored it. We're fixing a broken system." Kellerman laughed dryly, shaking his head. "That's quite the spin." Pam smiled again, her eyes steely. "James, it's only spin when you don't like the facts." The audience let out an audible, "Ooh." Some clapped. Kellerman shifted in his chair, realizing this wasn't going to be as easy as he thought. He leaned in again. Let's talk about law enforcement. You've defended President Trump's calls for stronger policing even when reports show that minority communities are disproportionately affected. Do you not see the problem with that? Pam exhaled, choosing her words carefully. James, let's be clear. The majority of Americans, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, want safe neighborhoods. Strong policing isn't an attack on communities, it's a protection for them. When crime rises, it's the most vulnerable who suffer first. Defunding the police, demonizing officers, making them afraid to do their jobs, that's what hurts people. Kellerman opened his mouth, but Pam cut him off. Let me ask you something, James. If you were in danger, if someone broke into your house, if your family was at risk, who's the first person you'd call? Silence. Kellerman blinked, then chuckled nervously. That's an overly simplistic. No, it's a real question, Pam pressed. Who would you call? He shifted uncomfortably. Obviously, law enforcement, but Pam nodded. Exactly. Because when it's your safety on the line, you trust the police. And every American deserves that same security. The audience applauded louder this time. Kellerman's smile wavered just slightly. Pam had turned the tables. And she was just getting started. Kellerman's carefully rehearsed strategy was slipping. He had expected Pam Bondi to be defensive, scrambling to justify her administration's policies. Instead, she was confident, unshaken, and worst of all, she was winning over the audience. Time to turn up the pressure. Kellerman shuffled his papers, masking his frustration with a smirk. All right, Attorney General, let's talk about ethics. You've stood by President Trump through numerous legal battles, impeachment, and accusations of corruption. Do you ever question whether you're defending the indefensible? Pam crossed her arms, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips. James, you and I both know that if there were real evidence of wrongdoing, we wouldn't be having this conversation, the justice system would be handling it. But time and time again, the so-called bombshells against President Trump turn out to be nothing but political theater. Kellerman scoffed. So, the multiple investigations, the lawsuits, those are just a coincidence? Pam leaned forward. They're part of a pattern, James. A pattern where certain media outlets, including this one, push a narrative with zero accountability. The American people were told the Russia collusion story was a smoking gun, it wasn't. They were told impeachment would remove Trump, it didn't. Now, every time a new headline drops, it's hyped up as the scandal that will finally take him down. But guess what? He's still here. Because facts matter more than wishful thinking. The audience clapped, some even stood up. Kellerman's expression darkened for just a second before he forced a chuckle. So you're saying the president is completely innocent? That he's never crossed any ethical lines? Pam tilted her head. Let me ask you this, James, since you're so concerned about ethics. Where was this outrage when politicians from the other side were caught mishandling classified documents? Or when past administrations lied about wars? Or when major corporations influenced elections? If we're going to talk about ethics, let's not pretend this is a one-sided issue. Kellerman opened his mouth, then closed it. Pam seized the moment. The truth is, your problem isn't with President Trump. It's with the fact that he doesn't play by your rules. He fights back. And that drives people like you crazy. Laughter and applause erupted from the audience. Kellerman straightened his tie, clearly rattled now. Attorney General, Pam held up a hand. You brought me here to put me on the defensive. But I think it's time we ask a different question. Why is it that, no matter how much this administration accomplishes record-low unemployment, energy independence, criminal justice reform, you and the media still spin it as a disaster? The audience murmured in agreement. Kellerman clenched his jaw. That's not fair. Pam didn't let up. No, James, what's not fair is gaslighting the American people. You push narratives that fit your agenda, but the country sees the results for themselves. And that's why, no matter how hard you try, you won't change the truth. Thunderous applause. Kellerman's smug mask shattered for the first time. He had lost control of the interview. And Pam Bondi had just delivered the knockout punch. Kellerman's face was tight, his usual smirk gone. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He had invited Pam Bondi expecting an easy target, another conservative to steamroll with smug interruptions and audience-led ambushes. Instead, she had taken control. The audience, which had entered the studio primed to cheer for Kellerman's jabs, was now applauding her instead. The energy had shifted and he knew it. But he wasn't ready to surrender. Taking a deep breath, Kellerman forced a grin and leaned forward, gripping the edges of his desk. All right, Attorney General, let's cut through the talking points. Let's talk about your legacy. When history looks back at your time in office, will you be proud of what you stood for? Or will you regret defending policies that so many believe were built on division and fear? Pam exhaled, slowly, deliberately. Then she locked eyes with him and spoke, her voice unwavering. You know, James, for all your talk about history, you seem to forget that history isn't written by media elites in air-conditioned studios. It's written by the American people. A hush fell over the room. She continued, her tone calm but powerful. And when I look back at my time in office, I'll know that I stood for law and order. That I defended the Constitution, not the latest trending outrage. That I fought to keep this country safe and to uphold justice, no matter how much the media tried to twist it. Kellerman opened his mouth, but Pam held up a hand. I will never regret standing up for border security because a nation that doesn't control its borders is no nation at all. Applause. I will never regret standing up for law enforcement because a society that demonizes its protectors invites chaos. Louder applause. And I will never regret defending a president who put America first, no matter how many journalists wanted him to fail. Thunderous applause. Some members of the audience even stood up, cheering. Kellerman's jaw was tight. He could feel the moments slipping through his fingers. He had lost. Pam smiled, a victory smile. Then she sat back in her chair and delivered the final blow. You asked about my legacy, James? Well, let me ask you this. When history looks back at you, what will it say? Silence. Kellerman blinked. For the first time, he had no comeback. The audience erupted once more, the cheers drowning out the cameras. Pam Bondi had done more than just hold her own. She had won. And everyone in that studio, including James Kellerman, knew it.